The December wind howled through the ancient oaks surrounding Winterbourne Manor, their bare branches clawing at the grey sky like skeletal fingers. Inside the grand drawing-room, Lady Madeline Winterbourne sat in her usual corner, a book balanced on her lap, doing her utmost to become invisible. Poor Madeline! Her cousin Lavinia's voice drifted across the room, deliberately loud enough to be heard. 26 years old, and still without prospects. Mama says it's quite tragic, really. Madeline's fingers tightened on the leather binding of her book, but she kept her eyes fixed on the page. She had learned long ago that responding only encouraged them. Perhaps she prefers the company of her novels to that of gentlemen, another cousin, Beatrice, added with a tinkling laugh that set Madeline's teeth on edge. Though one cannot help but wonder if the choice was ever truly hers to make. Lady Amelia Winterbourne, Madeline's mother, looked up from her embroidery with a frown. Girls, that is quite enough. But her reprimand lacked conviction, and the damage, as always, was done. Madeline rose from her chair with as much dignity as she could muster. "If you'll excuse me, I believe I shall take some air before dinner." She swept from the room before anyone could respond, her worn morning dress whispering against the Persian carpets. The moment she stepped into the corridor, she allowed herself a single, shuddering breath. How many more years of this could she endure? How many more family gatherings where she was the object of pity and poorly concealed mockery? "Careful, madam," a deep voice rumbled. "You nearly collided with me." Madeline looked up sharply and found herself staring into the darkest eyes she had ever seen. Black as midnight, set in a face of such striking masculine beauty that for a moment she forgot to breathe. The gentleman was tall, easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders encased in an impeccably tailored black coat. His hair was dark as coal, swept back from a high forehead, and his features were sharp and aristocratic. Forgive me," she stammered, stepping back. "I did not see you there." Evidently. His gaze swept over her with an assessment that was neither unkind nor particularly warm. "You are Lady Madeline, I presume?" "I am. And you are?" "Adrian Redwyke." He offered a slight bow. "Duke of Stormholt. I arrived not 20 minutes ago. Your father was kind enough to extend an invitation for the Christmas season." The Duke of Stormholt. Madeline had heard the name whispered in drawing-rooms across London. Wealthy beyond measure, devastatingly handsome, and utterly opposed to matrimony. At 32 years of age, he had evaded every matchmaking mama in England with a skill that bordered on the supernatural. The gossip said he was cold, calculating, and cared for nothing save his estates and his horses. "Welcome to Winterbourne Manor, Your Grace," Madeline said, executing a curtsy that years of deportment lessons had made automatic. "I hope your journey was not too disagreeable." "Tolerable." He studied her with those unsettling dark eyes. "You were fleeing something just now." It was not a question. Madeline felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I was seeking some air." "In the middle of winter? How invigorating." The corner of his mouth quirked, not quite a smile, but something approaching it. "Or perhaps you were escaping the tender mercies of your cousins." I confess I overheard a portion of their conversation as I passed the drawing-room, quite enlightening. Mortification washed over Madeleine in a cold wave. "Your Grace, "Do not apologize," he interrupted. "It was their cruelty, not yours, though I confess myself curious why you tolerate it." "What choice do I have?" The words escaped before she could stop them. "I am an unmarried woman of 26, Your Grace. Society has pronounced its verdict upon me. I am to be tolerated, pitied, and conveniently forgotten. Fighting against it would only provide further entertainment." Something flickered in those dark eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. "How pragmatic of you." "It is called survival, Your Grace." "Indeed." He was silent for a moment, still studying her with that penetrating gaze. "Tell me, Lady Madeline, do you ride?" The abrupt change of subject caught her off guard. Yes, though it has been some time since I have had the opportunity." "Tomorrow morning, then, 7 o'clock, meet me at the stables." He turned to leave, then paused. "And, Lady Madeline, bring your courage. I suspect you may need it." Before she could respond, he was gone, his long strides carrying him down the corridor toward the guest wing. Madeline stood frozen in place, her heart beating an erratic rhythm against her ribs. What on earth had just happened? The dinner that evening was a torturous affair. The dining room at Winterbourne Manor could seat 40 guests comfortably, but tonight there were only 15. family members and a few close acquaintances who had arrived early for the Christmas festivities. Madeleine found herself seated in her usual position, far down the table from her parents, wedged between her unmarried cousin Harriet and elderly Mr. Blackwood, who was quite deaf and preferred his own company. The Duke of Stormholt, naturally, had been placed in the seat of honour beside Madeleine's mother. From her distant vantage point, Madeleine could see him engaging in polite conversation, his expression carefully neutral. He wore evening attire with the same effortless elegance he had displayed earlier, his black coat and white cravat emphasizing the stark masculine beauty of his features. "The Duke is even more handsome than the rumours suggest," Lavinia said loudly, directing her comment to the table at large, "though I must say it is quite peculiar that he chooses to remain unwed at his age. One would think a man in his position would have secured an heir by now. Perhaps he finds the ladies of the ton lacking," Beatrice suggested with a coy smile, "though I cannot imagine what standards he must hold, that none have met them." Madeleine focused intently on her venison, willing herself to disappear into the wallpaper, but her cousin Harriet, who possessed more spite than sense, leaned close and whispered, "Do not develop any foolish notions about the Duke, Madeleine. A man of his consequence would never consider someone like you. He needs an heiress, not a charity case." The words struck like physical blows, but Madeleine kept her expression serene. She had become an expert at hiding pain. "Miss Harriet," the Duke's voice cut through the chatter like a knife through butter. The entire table fell silent. "I could not help but overhear your comment. I wonder if you might enlighten me. What precisely constitutes a charity case in your estimation?" Harriet's face drained of colour. "Your Grace, I merely meant, because in my experience," Adrian continued, his tone conversational but his eyes cold as winter frost, "those who concern themselves with categorizing others are often desperately trying to secure their own precarious positions. Would you agree?" The silence was absolute. Harriet looked as though she might faint. Several other guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Earl Joseph Winterbourne, Madeleine's father, cleared his throat. "Your Grace, I apologize if—" "No apology necessary," Adrian said smoothly. "I was merely engaging Miss Harriet in philosophical discussion, though perhaps the topic is too complex for the dinner table." He turned to Lady Amelia with a charming smile. "Lady Winterbourne, you were telling me about the Christmas ball. I understand it is quite the event." The conversation resumed, but Madeleine could feel eyes upon her, curious, speculative, confused. Why would a duke defend her? What interest could he possibly have in her affairs? She risked a glance toward the head of the table and found Adrian looking directly at her. He raised his wine-glass in the smallest of salutes, and despite herself, Madeleine felt her lips curve into a smile. Perhaps survival was not her only option after all. The next morning dawned cold and crisp, the kind of December day where every breath turned to mist and frost painted intricate patterns on the windows. Madeleine woke before dawn, her conversation with the Duke playing on endless repeat in her mind. She should not go to the stables. It would only fuel gossip, invite speculation, and likely result in humiliation when he failed to appear. The entire encounter had probably been a momentary impulse on his part, forgotten as soon as he retired to his chambers. And yet, at 6:45, Madeleine found herself dressed in her riding habit, a dark green ensemble that was several years out of fashion, but still serviceable. She crept through the silent house like a thief, careful to avoid the servants who were beginning their morning routines. The last thing she needed was for word to spread that she had gone riding with the Duke before breakfast. The stables were warm compared to the bitter cold outside, heated by the body warmth of the horses, and sweet with the scent of hay and leather. Madeleine had always loved this place. It was one of the few locations where she felt truly at peace. "You came." She spun around to find Adrian emerging from one of the stalls, leading a magnificent black stallion. He wore riding attire that somehow made him look even more imposing. Tall boots, buckskin breeches, and a dark coat that emphasized his broad shoulders. "I said I would," Madeleine replied, lifting her chin. "Did you doubt me?" "Most ladies of my acquaintance say many things they do not mean." He studied her with those penetrating dark eyes. "I am pleased to discover you are not among them. This is midnight." He patted the stallion's neck. "And I have taken the liberty of having Shadow prepared for you. Your father's groom assures me she is gentle but spirited." A grey mare stood in the adjacent stall, already saddled. Madeleine approached her carefully, allowing the horse to become accustomed to her scent. "She's beautiful." "As are you." Madeleine froze, certain she had misheard. But when she turned, Adrian was still watching her with that same intense focus. "Your Grace, No one is here to overhear us, Lady Madeleine. We may dispense with the formalities if you wish. My name is Adrian." "That would be highly improper." "So would meeting a gentleman at dawn for a clandestine ride." He moved closer, close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the faint scar along his jaw. "I think we have already ventured beyond the bounds of propriety. Do you not agree?" Her heart was thundering now, a wild drum beat in her chest. "Why did you ask me here?" "Because I have a proposition for you." He gestured toward the stable doors. "But first let us ride. I find I think more clearly in motion." They rode across the frost-covered fields of Winterbourne Manor, in silence at first, their horses' breath creating clouds in the icy air. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold that seemed almost impossible in their beauty. Madeleine had forgotten how much she loved this, the freedom of movement, the wind in her face, the sense of being untethered from all the expectations and disappointments that awaited her back at the manor. Adrian rode with the easy confidence of a man born to the saddle. He pushed Midnight into a gallop, and Madeleine urged Shadow to follow, her blood singing with exhilaration as they raced across the frozen landscape. When they finally slowed, her cheeks were flushed and her breathing rapid. "You ride well," Adrian observed, bringing Midnight alongside Shadow. "Better than most ladies I've encountered." "My father taught me when I was a girl," Madeleine said. "Before?" She trailed off. "Before you became unmarriageable?" The bluntness of the question should have offended her, but instead Madeleine found herself laughing, a sound that felt rusty from disuse. "Is that what they say about me in London?" "Among other things." He studied her profile. "But I find I care very little for London gossip. It is usually wrong." They had reached the edge of a small wood, bare trees stretching toward the winter sky. Adrian dismounted and offered his hand to help her down. His grip was warm and strong, and Madeleine was acutely aware of how close they stood when her feet touched the ground. "You mentioned a proposition," she said, stepping back to put a respectable distance between them. "I did." Adrian led both horses to a fallen log and looped their reins around it. Then he turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "I find myself in a predicament, Lady Madeleine. As you may be aware, I am 32 years old and unwed. This has begun to cause complications." "Complications?" "Rumors," he clarified. "Questions about my preferences, my character, my ability to perform my duties as a duke. The gossips have become vicious in their speculation. My mother writes to me weekly, begging me to secure a wife. My peers look at me with suspicion, and the fortune hunters have become unbearable in their pursuit." Madeleine frowned. "I fail to see how this concerns me. I attended your family's dinner last night and observed how they treat you, with pity, with condescension, as though you are somehow less worthy of respect because you have not secured a husband." His dark eyes held hers. "We are both victims of societal expectations, you and I. Both judged and found wanting, because we do not conform to what is expected of us. That may be true, but I propose an arrangement," Adrian interrupted. "A temporary one. Your father mentioned that Winterbourne Manor will be hosting a grand Christmas ball in 2 weeks' time, apparently one of the social events of the season. Half of London society will be in attendance." Madeleine's stomach tightened with dread. The Christmas ball was an annual torture, an evening where she stood against the wall while her cousins danced and flirted and secured admirers. "Yes, the ball. What of it?" "I propose that you pretend to be my fiancée for the evening." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Madeleine stared at him, certain she had misunderstood. "I beg your pardon?" "Think about it," Adrian said, his voice low and persuasive. "One evening where we present ourselves to society as an engaged couple. I gain respectability and silence the gossips. You gain the satisfaction of watching every person who has ever pitied or mocked you realize they were wrong about you. Your cousins, your family, everyone who has ever dismissed you as unmarriageable. They will all see you on the arm of one of England's most eligible dukes." It was madness, absolute madness. "And yet, after the ball?" Madeleine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We quietly end the engagement. Mutual agreement, no scandal. You return to your life, I return to mine. But we will have accomplished our goals. You will have proven yourself worthy of attention, and I will have shown society that I am not the confirmed bachelor they believe me to be." Madeleine turned away, her mind racing. It was manipulation, pure and simple, a deception that could backfire spectacularly if anyone discovered the truth. And yet, the thought of seeing Lavinia's face, Harriet's shock, the stunned silence when she entered the ballroom on Adrian's arm. "There would be conditions," she said slowly. "Of course. Name them. First, we must be convincing. If anyone suspects this is false, the scandal would destroy us both." "Agreed. We shall spend time together, learn about one another, practice the behaviors expected of an engaged couple." "Second," Madeleine continued, turning to face him, "after the ball, the separation must be handled delicately. I will not be painted as the jilted party. We shall craft a story of mutual respect and understanding. No one will question it." Madeleine took a deep breath. "And third, there can be no genuine sentiment involved. This is a business arrangement, nothing more. We pretend for the benefit of society, but we must not allow ourselves to be deceived by our own fiction." Something flickered across Adrian's face, too quick for her to identify. "You propose a rule, then, no real feelings." "Precisely. Do you agree?" He extended his hand. "I agree to your terms, Lady Madeleine. We shall be the most convincing false engagement in the history of English society. And when it ends, we part as friendly conspirators, nothing more." Madeleine looked at his outstretched hand, strong, elegant, offering her something she had never dared hope for, a chance to matter, even if only for one evening. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. "We have an accord, Your Grace." "Adrian," he corrected, his fingers closing around hers. "If we are to be engaged, you must call me Adrian." "Very well, Adrian." His name felt strange on her lips, intimate in a way that made her pulse quicken. "And you must call me Madeleine." "Madeleine." The way he said it, low and soft, sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the December cold. A beautiful name for a beautiful woman. "You need not practice flattery when we are alone," she said, pulling her hand away. "Save it for the ball." But as they walked back to their horses, Madeleine could still feel the warmth of his touch on her skin, and she wondered if she had just made the wisest decision of her life, or the most foolish. The following days passed in a strange, dreamlike haze. Adrian had been true to his word. He spent considerable time in Madeleine's company, much to the astonishment of her family. They took daily rides across the estate, walked through the frost-covered gardens, and sat together in the library discussing books and philosophy. To any observer, they appeared to be conducting a proper courtship. "I confess I am utterly baffled," Lady Amelia said to her daughter one afternoon as they sat in the morning room. "The Duke of Stormholt has shown more interest in you these past 3 days than any gentleman has in 6 years. What can it mean?" Madeleine kept her expression carefully neutral as she worked on her embroidery. "Perhaps he simply enjoys intelligent conversation, Mama. Not all gentlemen are seeking frivolous entertainment." "But, darling, he is a duke. He could have his pick of any lady in England. Why would he choose to spend his time with—" She trailed off, but the implication was clear. "With me?" Madeleine finished, keeping her voice steady despite the familiar sting of her mother's doubt. "Perhaps you underestimate me, Mama, or perhaps you have been listening too long to Lavinia and her ilk." Lady Amelia had the grace to look ashamed. "I only worry for you, Madeleine. I would not wish to see you develop expectations that cannot be fulfilled. The Duke is notorious for avoiding matrimony." "Then we are well matched, for I have long since abandoned any expectations of marriage." Madeleine set down her embroidery and met her mother's eyes. "If the Duke finds me tolerable company, I see no reason not to enjoy it while it lasts." What her mother did not know, what no one knew save Adrian, was that their time together had become far more than mere pretense. During their rides and conversations, Madeleine had discovered a man of surprising depth and complexity. Adrian was well-read, wickedly intelligent, and possessed a dry wit that made her laugh in ways she had forgotten were possible. He was also, she was beginning to realize with growing alarm, dangerously easy to care for. "Tell me about your childhood," Adrian said on their fourth afternoon together as they walked through Winterbourne's portrait gallery. Snow was falling outside the tall windows, creating a hushed, intimate atmosphere. "There is little to tell," Madeleine replied. "I was an ordinary child who grew into an ordinary woman." "I do not believe that for a moment." He stopped before a portrait of a young girl with dark curls and serious eyes. "Is this you?" "When I was 12, she confirmed, "before I understood what it meant to be a disappointment." Adrian turned to study her face. "Who made you believe you were a disappointment?" "Everyone." The word escaped before she could stop it. "My mother, who grew weary of presenting me to society season after season with no results. My father, who stopped looking at me with pride and started looking at me with resignation. My cousins, who found endless entertainment in my failure to secure even a single marriage proposal. And why do you suppose you received no proposals?" Madeleine laughed bitterly. "I am not beautiful like my sisters. I am too tall, too plain, too serious. I speak my mind when I should be demure. I read books when I should be practicing pianoforte. I am, in short, everything a gentleman does not want in a wife." "How very fortunate for those gentlemen," Adrian said quietly, "that I am not interested in what they want." Madeleine's breath caught. They stood very close now, close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his dark eyes, could smell the sandalwood scent of his cologne. "Adrian, we should not what? Speak honestly." He reached up and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers grazing her cheek. "One of the advantages of our arrangement, Madeleine, is that we need not dissemble with one another. I find you fascinating. Your height is elegant, your features are striking, and your intelligence is intoxicating. If the gentlemen of London were too blind to see that, then they deserve their silly, vapid wives. You are merely being kind. I am never merely kind." His hand lingered near her face, and Madeleine found herself leaning into the touch before she could stop herself. "I am being honest. Something I suspect you have not experienced enough of in your life." For a long moment, they stood frozen in the portrait gallery, the falling snow creating a curtain of white beyond the windows. Madeleine's heart hammered against her ribs, and she was acutely aware of how easy it would be to close the small distance between them, to discover if his lips were as warm as his touch. "We should return to the house," she whispered, stepping back. "It is nearly time for tea." "Of course." Adrian's expression was unreadable as he offered his arm. "We must maintain propriety, after all." But as they walked back through the corridors of Winterbourne Manor, Madeleine could not shake the feeling that their carefully constructed arrangement was beginning to crack at the foundations. The cracks became more evident with each passing day. On the fifth day, Adrian insisted on teaching Madeleine to waltz in the empty ballroom. "We must appear natural together," he reasoned. "If we stumble through the first dance at the ball, no one will believe our engagement is genuine." He was right, of course, but Madeleine had not anticipated what it would feel like to be held in his arms, to move in perfect synchronization with him as invisible musicians played in her imagination. Adrian was an excellent dancer, his movements smooth and confident, and Madeleine found herself relaxing into his lead. "You dance beautifully," he murmured as they swept across the polished floor. "Why did no one ever notice?" "Because no one ever asked me to dance," Madeleine replied. "When you stand against the wall long enough, you become part of the furniture." Adrian's arm tightened around her waist. "Then they were fools, every one of them." "You keep saying that, but what? You do not believe me?" He spun her suddenly, pulling her even closer so that she could feel the heat of his body through the layers of fabric separating them. "Madeleine, look at me." She raised her eyes to his and found herself drowning in the intensity of his gaze. "I am many things," Adrian said softly. "Arrogant, certainly. Difficult, undoubtedly. But I am not a liar. When I tell you that you are remarkable, I mean every word. When I tell you that society's judgment of you is worthless, I speak the absolute truth. And when I tell you that any man would be fortunate to call you his wife, I am being more sincere than I have been about anything in my entire life." "Adrian!" His name was barely a whisper on her lips. "I know," he said, and there was something almost painful in his voice. "I know what we agreed. No real feelings. A temporary arrangement. But, Madeleine, I must confess—" "No." She pulled away from him abruptly, her heart racing. "Please do not say whatever you are about to say." "Why not?" "Because once words are spoken, They cannot be unspoken. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the room. We have an agreement, Adrian, a rule. The moment one of us breaks it, everything falls apart. And if the rule is impossible to keep, Madeline closed her eyes, then we must try harder. She heard him move closer, felt the warmth of his presence at her back. What if I do not want to try harder? He asked, his voice rough. What if I want to break every rule we established? What if I want to tell you that these past 5 days have been the most extraordinary of my life? What if I want to confess that when I look at you, I forget every reason I ever had for avoiding matrimony? Stop. The word came out as a plea. Please, Adrian, if you have any mercy, stop. For a long moment, silence filled the ballroom. Then she felt him step back, felt the absence of his warmth like a physical loss. Forgive me, he said formally. I have overstepped. It will not happen again. Madeline turned to find him bowing stiffly, his expression once again the cool, aristocratic mask he wore for society. I should return to my chambers, she said. We can continue our preparations tomorrow. As you wish, Lady Madeline. The formal address stung more than she wanted to admit. But as she fled the ballroom, Madeline told herself it was for the best. They had a rule for a reason. Feelings led to hurt, to disappointment, to the kind of pain she had spent 6 years learning to avoid. She absolutely would not allow herself to fall in love with the Duke of Stormholt, even if it was already far too late to stop it. The next 3 days were agony. Adrian maintained a polite distance, treating Madeline with the same courtesy he might show any casual acquaintance. They still took their daily rides, still appeared together at meals, but the warmth was gone, replaced by a careful formality that made Madeleine's chest ache. Her family noticed the change immediately. It seems the Duke has lost interest, Lavinia said smugly over breakfast on the 8th day. How very predictable. I suppose even he has his limits when it comes to charity. Madeleine focused on her tea, refusing to give her cousin the satisfaction of a response. But the words cut deep, confirming every fear she had harbored. Adrian had realized the truth that she was exactly what everyone said she was. Unmarriageable, unlovable, unworthy of genuine affection. I think you are wrong, Lavinia, a new voice interjected. Madeleine looked up in surprise to find her younger sister, Charlotte, watching her with sympathetic eyes. I think the Duke cares for Madeleine very much. Anyone who watched them together these past days could see it. Then why has he grown so distant? Lavinia challenged. Perhaps, Charlotte said quietly, because he is frightened. That afternoon, Madeleine sought refuge in the library, her favorite sanctuary within Winterbourne Manor. The room was 2 stories tall, filled with thousands of volumes that represented every corner of human knowledge and imagination. She had spent countless hours here, losing herself in stories of adventure and romance, dreaming of a life beyond the narrow confines of her own. She was so absorbed in her book that she did not hear the door open. Hiding again? Madeleine looked up to find Adrian standing in the doorway, still wearing his riding clothes. His dark hair was windswept, his cheeks flushed from the cold, and her traitorous heart lurched at the sight of him. I am reading, not hiding, she said, keeping her voice carefully neutral. There is a difference. Is there? He moved into the room, closing the door behind him. Because it seems to me that we have both been hiding these past 3 days. From the truth, from each other, from what we both know is happening between us. Adrian, please. No, Madeleine. No more running. He crossed the space between them in 3 long strides and pulled her to her feet. I have tried to respect your wishes. I have tried to maintain distance, but I cannot do it anymore. I cannot pretend that this is merely an arrangement when every moment with you makes me question every decision I have ever made. You are not making sense. I am making perfect sense, and you know it. His hands gripped her shoulders, his dark eyes blazing with intensity. I told myself I would never marry because I watched my parents destroy each other with their indifference. I told myself love was an illusion perpetuated by poets and fools. But then I met you and everything I thought I knew became irrelevant. This is the arrangement talking, Madeleine protested weakly. We have been playing at engagement, and the lines have blurred. Once the ball is over, I'm going to ask your father for permission to truly court you. Adrian's declaration hung in the air between them. Because I do not want a temporary arrangement, Madeleine. I want a real engagement, a real marriage, a real life with you. Madeleine felt tears prick her eyes. You do not mean that. You cannot mean that. Why can I not? Because men like you do not marry women like me. The words burst from her like a dam breaking. You are a duke, Adrian. You could have any woman in England, beautiful, accomplished, wealthy women with impeccable connections. Why would you choose someone who has been rejected by society? Someone whose own family barely tolerates her? Someone who brings you nothing but the scandal of an unequal match? Is that truly what you believe? Adrian's voice was soft now, almost wondering. That you bring me nothing? What else am I to believe? He released her shoulders and took a step back, running his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. Madeleine, when I look at you, do you know what I see? She shook her head, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. I see a woman who has endured years of cruelty with grace and dignity, a woman whose intelligence intimidates lesser minds, a woman who reads voraciously, thinks deeply, and speaks with an honesty that is rarer than diamonds in the circles I inhabit. He moved closer again, his voice dropping to an intimate murmur. I see a woman whose smile makes my heart beat faster, whose laughter is the most beautiful sound I have ever heard, whose courage in the face of rejection humbles me. Adrian, I see the woman I want to wake up beside every morning for the rest of my life, he finished. The woman I want to share my thoughts with, my fears with, my triumphs with. The woman I want to build a life with, away from the judgment of society, in a place where we can simply be ourselves. A tear slipped down Madeleine's cheek. I am frightened. So am I. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. I'm terrified, Madeleine, because this is real, and real things can hurt us. But I would rather face that fear with you than spend the rest of my life in the comfortable numbness I inhabited before we met. What if it does not work? What if it does, he countered. What if we are brave enough to reach for what we want instead of settling for what is expected? What if we build something extraordinary together? Madeleine stared up at him, her heart warring with her mind. Everything she had learned, everything she had experienced, told her this was impossible. Dukes did not marry spinsters. Men like Adrian did not fall in love with women like her. And yet, his hands were still cradling her face with infinite tenderness. His eyes held hers with an intensity that seemed to see straight through to her soul. And in that moment, Madeleine realized that perhaps, just perhaps, she had been wrong about everything. I am falling in love with you, she whispered. I have been trying so hard not to, but I am, and it terrifies me. Adrian's answering smile was like sunrise breaking over a dark horizon. Good, he said, because I am already hopelessly in love with you, and it would be dreadfully unfair if I had to suffer alone. Then he kissed her. It was not the chaste, restrained kiss of propriety. It was a claiming, a declaration, a promise, all wrapped into one perfect moment. Madeleine melted into him, her hands fisting in his coat, her entire world narrowing to the taste of his lips, the warmth of his embrace, the rightness of being held by him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. We are going to cause a scandal, he murmured. Undoubtedly, Madeleine agreed, unable to stop smiling. But I find I no longer care what society thinks. That is because you are finally free, my darling. He pressed another kiss to her forehead. Free to be yourself. Free to be loved as you deserve. Free to be mine. And you are mine, Madeleine said, the words feeling like a vow. No more running. No more hiding, no more pretending. No more pretending, Adrian agreed. But we still have a Christmas ball to attend, and I believe we owe your family quite the performance. Madeleine laughed, a sound of pure joy. I suppose we do. Though I confess after everything that has happened, I am no longer certain how to distinguish between performance and reality. Then we shall simply be ourselves, Adrian said, taking her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. Two people who have been foolish enough to break their own rule and fall desperately in love. I suspect that will be shocking enough for everyone. As they stood together in the library, the winter afternoon fading into evening beyond the windows, Madeleine realized that her life had transformed completely in the space of 8 days. She had gone from resigned spinster to beloved fiancée, and not merely for show, but in truth. The Duke of Stormholt loved her, and against all odds, all expectations, all the cruelties society had inflicted upon her, Madeline Winterbourne had finally found exactly what she had been searching for in all those romantic novels: true love. The morning of the Christmas ball dawned clear and cold, the winter sun casting long shadows across the snow-covered grounds of Winterbourne Manor. The entire household was in organized chaos, servants rushing about with final preparations, guests arriving throughout the day, the ballroom being transformed into a glittering winter wonderland. Madeline stood at her bedroom window, watching carriages arrive one after another, disgorging London's elite in a steady stream. In a few hours, she would descend the grand staircase on Adrian's arm and face all the people who had dismissed and mocked her. But everything had changed. "Madeline!" Her sister Charlotte slipped into the room, her expression concerned. "You have been standing at that window for nearly an hour. Are you well?" "I am overwhelmed," Madeline admitted. "Everything is happening so quickly. Just 2 weeks ago, I was invisible. Now I am to be engaged to a duke." Charlotte moved to stand beside her. "Officially engaged?" Madeline turned to her sister in surprise. "You know, I suspected from the beginning that something was not quite what it appeared," Charlotte said gently. "The Duke looked at you with too much calculation at first, as though he were solving a problem rather than courting a lady. But then, over the past days, that changed. He looks at you now as though you are the sun and he a planet caught in your orbit." "He wants to make it real," Madeline confessed. "The engagement. He says he will speak to father after the ball tonight." "And what do you want?" It was such a simple question, and yet Madeline found herself struggling to answer. What did she want? For so many years, she had trained herself not to want anything, not to hope, not to dream. The habit of resignation was difficult to break. "I want to believe it is possible," she finally said. "I want to believe that someone like Adrian could genuinely love someone like me. But Charlotte, I am so frightened. What if this is all a beautiful dream that shatters the moment we face reality? What if his family objects? What if society refuses to accept me as a duchess? What if he realizes he has made a terrible mistake?" Charlotte took her hand and squeezed it. "Those are valid fears, sister. But answer me this, do you love him?" "Yes," Madeline whispered. "Heaven help me, but I do." "Then that is all that matters. Love is always a risk, Madeline, but some risks are worth taking." As afternoon turned to evening, Winterbourne Manor transformed into something from a fairy tale. Thousands of candles illuminated every room. Evergreen garlands draped the banisters, interwoven with red velvet ribbons. In the ballroom, crystal chandeliers sparkled like stars, and the orchestra was tuning their instruments in preparation for the evening's entertainment. Madeline's mother had insisted on providing her with a new gown for the occasion, a gesture that surprised Madeline with its thoughtfulness. The dress was exquisite, deep sapphire silk that brought out the blue in her eyes, with delicate silver embroidery along the bodice and hem. It was the finest thing Madeline had ever worn. Her maid, Susan, arranged her dark hair in an elegant, upswept style, leaving a few curls to frame her face. When Madeline finally looked at herself in the mirror, she hardly recognized the woman staring back at her. "You look like a princess, my lady," Susan said with genuine warmth. "The Duke will not be able to take his eyes off you." A knock at the door interrupted Madeline's examination of her reflection. Charlotte opened it to reveal Lady Amelia, dressed in her own finery for the evening. "Madeline, Her mother stopped, her eyes widening. "My darling girl, you look absolutely beautiful." It was perhaps the kindest thing her mother had said to her in years. Madeline felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you, Mama." Lady Amelia crossed the room and took both of Madeline's hands in hers. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "For years I have allowed others' opinions to color my treatment of you. I convinced myself that by lowering my expectations, I was protecting you from disappointment. But I see now that I was only adding to your pain." "Mama, please let me finish." Lady Amelia's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Watching the Duke of Stormholt court you these past 2 weeks has shown me what I should have seen all along. You are extraordinary, Madeline. Intelligent, kind, resilient beyond measure. Any man would be fortunate to call you his wife, Duke or otherwise." Madeline embraced her mother, years of hurt beginning to heal in that single moment. "Thank you," she whispered. "That means more than you know." "Now," Lady Amelia said, stepping back and dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, The Duke is waiting for you downstairs. He asked me specifically to tell you that he will be in the portrait gallery when you are ready to descend." "The portrait gallery? Why there?" Her mother smiled mysteriously. "I believe he wishes for a private moment before you face the masses. Go to him, darling. Do not keep him waiting." The portrait gallery was dimly lit, only a few candles illuminating the paintings of Madeline's ancestors. She found Adrian standing before her childhood portrait, the one they had looked at together over a week ago. He turned at her approach, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. He was resplendent in formal evening attire, black coat and breeches, snowy white cravat, a dark blue waistcoat that matched her gown almost perfectly. But it was the way he looked at her that made her feel truly beautiful for the first time in her life. "Madeline," he breathed, "you are absolutely magnificent." "You clean up rather well yourself," she said, attempting lightness despite the hammering of her heart. Adrian closed the distance between them and took her hands. "Before we go down to the ball, I need to tell you something. Several things, actually." "That sounds ominous." "Not ominous, just honest." He took a deep breath. "When I first proposed our arrangement, I told you it was because I wanted to silence gossip and maintain my reputation. That was partially true, but it was not the whole truth." Madeline frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I had already decided you were remarkable before I ever spoke to you." Adrian's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "I spent those days observing, watching how your family treated you, how you carried yourself despite their cruelty, how you found joy in small things like books and solitary walks. You were watching me. I was fascinated by you," he corrected. "Here was a woman who should have been broken by years of rejection, and yet you maintained your dignity, your intelligence, your essential goodness. When I overheard your cousins mocking you that day in the corridor, I knew I had to do something. The fake engagement was partially self-serving, yes, but it was also my way of giving you what you deserved, a chance to show society they were wrong about you." Madeline processed this revelation slowly. "So, even in the beginning, you cared?" "Even in the beginning I cared." Adrian smiled ruefully. "I was simply too much of a coward to admit it, even to myself. I told myself I was being pragmatic, logical. But the truth is I was already half in love with you before we ever made our agreement. I just did not recognize it until it was too late to stop it." "Adrian," Madeline touched his face gently. "You should have told me." "I know. But I was frightened you would refuse if you knew my true motivations. I was frightened that you would see through my carefully constructed logic to the desperate truth beneath, that I was a lonely man who had finally met someone who made him want to risk everything." "I would not have refused," Madeline said softly. "Even if I did not understand it then, I think some part of me knew we were meant to find each other." Adrian pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. "This belonged to my grandmother. She was, by all accounts, a remarkable woman, strong-willed, intelligent, and utterly unimpressed by social conventions. My grandfather fell in love with her despite his family's objections that she was not grand enough for a duke. They were married for 47 years and were, by all reports, deeply happy." He opened the box to reveal a stunning ring, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds, set in gold. It matched her gown perfectly. "I had planned to give this to you after I spoke with your father," Adrian continued, "but I find I cannot wait. Madeline Winterbourne, will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Not as pretense, not as arrangement, but in truth? Will you marry me, knowing that I am difficult and proud and occasionally impossible? Will you take a chance on a man who was foolish enough to think he could pretend to love you when the reality was inevitable from the first moment?" Madeline felt tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Adrian. I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit as though it had been made for her. Then he kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache, a kiss that tasted of promise and hope and future. When they broke apart, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. "Are you ready to face the wolves? With you beside me, I could face anything." "Good." He offered his arm. "Because I intend to make quite the announcement this evening. I hope you do not mind having your private moment made very public." Madeline laughed, giddy with happiness. "I thought we were supposed to be subtle, a quiet, fake engagement that we would end discreetly." "Plans change," Adrian said with a wicked smile. And I find I'm no longer interested in subtlety. I want all of London to know that you are mine and I am yours. Let them gossip. Let them speculate. Let them realize they were complete fools forever overlooking you. As they walked toward the ballroom, Madeleine's hand resting on Adrian's arm, she felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was what she had been waiting for all these years. Not just love, but partnership. Not just acceptance, but celebration. Not just survival, but joy. The Duke of Stormholt had asked her to pretend to be his fiancée at the Christmas ball, but there would be no pretending tonight. The ballroom was already crowded when they arrived at the top of the grand staircase. Madeleine could see hundreds of faces turned upward, could hear the sudden hush as they caught sight of her and Adrian together. "Ladies and gentlemen," the butler's voice rang out, "His Grace, the Duke of Stormholt, and Lady Madeleine Winterbourne." They descended the staircase together, Adrian's hand covering hers on his arm. Madeleine kept her chin high, her gaze steady, even as she felt hundreds of eyes boring into her. She could see Lavinia's shocked face, Harriet's dropped jaw, her cousin's expressions of complete disbelief. At the bottom of the stairs, Earl Joseph and Lady Amelia waited with proud smiles. But it was the crowd's reaction that struck Madeleine most forcefully. The whispered speculations, the envious glances, the sudden realization dawning on face after face that they had been wrong about her. Adrian led her to the center of the ballroom. The orchestra ceased their playing. The entire assembly fell silent, waiting. "Your Grace," Earl Joseph said formally, "we are honored by your presence at our Christmas celebration." "The honor is mine, my lord," Adrian replied, his voice carrying throughout the vast space. "Though I confess I have an ulterior motive for my attendance this evening." The crowd leaned forward collectively, hungry for gossip. Adrian turned to face Madeleine, taking both her hands in his. "2 weeks ago I arrived at Winterbourne Manor a convinced bachelor, certain that matrimony held nothing for me but obligation and tedium. But then I met your daughter, my lord, and every certainty I possessed crumbled to dust." Gasps rippled through the assembly. Madeleine's heart was thundering so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. "Lady Madeleine Winterbourne is the most extraordinary woman I have ever encountered," Adrian continued, his dark eyes never leaving hers even as he addressed the room. "She is intelligent beyond measure, brave beyond comprehension, and kind beyond reason. She has endured years of society's judgment with grace I can only aspire to, and somehow, miraculously, she has agreed to become my wife." The ballroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Madeleine saw her mother press a handkerchief to her eyes, saw her father beam with pride, saw her cousin's expressions transform from shock to something that might have been grudging respect. "Lord Winterbourne," Adrian said formally, "I have not yet had the opportunity to formally request your permission for your daughter's hand. I remedy that oversight now before all of London society. May I have the honor of marrying Lady Madeleine?" Earl Joseph stepped forward, his voice thick with emotion. "Your Grace, you have my blessing and my gratitude. I can think of no man more worthy of my daughter." The ballroom exploded in applause. Adrian raised Madeleine's hand to his lips, the sapphire ring catching the candlelight and sending sparkles of blue fire dancing across the walls. "Dance with me," he murmured, loud enough for only her to hear. "Let us show them exactly how real this is." The orchestra began playing a waltz, the same waltz they had practiced in the empty ballroom days earlier. But this time there was no hesitation, no careful distance, no pretense of formality. Adrian pulled Madeleine into his arms and swept her across the floor with a possessiveness that left no doubt about his feelings. "They are all staring," Madeleine whispered. "Let them stare." Adrian spun her, bringing her even closer. "Let them see what true love looks like. Let them understand what fools they were to ever dismiss you." As they danced, other couples gradually joined them on the floor, but Madeleine was only aware of Adrian, his strong arms holding her, his dark eyes gazing into hers, his love wrapping around her like the warmest cloak. "I love you," she said, not caring who might overhear. "And I love you," Adrian replied. "Today, tomorrow, and for all the days to come, you are mine, Madeleine Winterbourne. And I am irrevocably yours." The waltz ended, and the ballroom erupted in applause once more. But before they could leave the floor, a voice rang out, "Your Grace, Lady Madeleine!" They turned to find Lavinia pushing through the crowd, her face flushed. For a terrible moment, Madeleine braced herself for cruelty, for some cutting remark designed to ruin this perfect moment. But instead, Lavinia curtsied deeply. I wish to apologize," she said, her voice carrying in the sudden silence. "For years I have treated you abominably, Madeleine. I was cruel when I should have been kind, mocking when I should have been supportive. I allowed jealousy to poison my better nature." She raised her eyes, and Madeleine saw genuine remorse there. "You deserved better from me, from all of us. I hope you can forgive me." Madeleine stared at her cousin in astonishment. Around the ballroom, other family members were nodding, shamefaced. Harriet stepped forward next. "Lavinia speaks for all of us," Harriet said quietly. "We were wrong, Madeleine, terribly, unforgivably wrong. You were never the problem. We were." Adrian's hand tightened on Madeleine's waist, offering silent support. Madeleine took a deep breath, considering her response. She could be cruel now, could return every slight with cutting words of her own. They would deserve it. But as she looked around the ballroom, at her mother's proud face, her father's beaming smile, Charlotte's joyful tears, and Adrian's steady, loving presence at her side, Madeleine realized she had no room left in her heart for bitterness. "I forgive you," she said simply. "All of you. We cannot change the past, but perhaps we can build a better future." Lavinia's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "You are far more gracious than I deserve." As her cousins melted back into the crowd, Adrian leaned close to Madeleine's ear. "You are remarkable," he murmured. "Have I mentioned that recently?" "Once or twice," Madeleine replied, smiling. "But I do not mind hearing it again." The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of well-wishes and congratulations. Madeleine danced with her father, with Adrian's friends who had arrived for the ball, with gentlemen who had never before acknowledged her existence. She was embraced by matrons who had previously snubbed her, complimented by ladies who had once mocked her behind their fans. It was everything she had dreamed of and nothing like what she had expected, because the validation, the acceptance, the sudden respect, none of it mattered as much as the simple truth that Adrian loved her. As midnight approached, Adrian stole her away from the ballroom, leading her through the corridors to a small balcony that overlooked the snow-covered gardens. "I needed a moment alone with you," he explained, pulling her into his arms. "Away from the crowds, the gossip, the expectations. Just us." Madeleine wrapped her arms around his waist and rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "This is real," she said wonderingly. "Everything that has happened, it is all real." "It is real," Adrian confirmed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You are mine, I am yours, and we are about to embark on the greatest adventure of our lives." "Marriage to you will certainly be an adventure," Madeleine teased. "You are the most stubborn, arrogant man I have ever met. And you are the most infuriating, challenging woman in all of England." Adrian tilted her chin up so he could see her face. "We are going to have a magnificent life together, Madeleine. I promise you that." "I believe you," she whispered. As church bells somewhere in the distance chimed midnight, announcing the arrival of Christmas Day, Adrian kissed her beneath the starlit sky. It was a kiss that tasted of new beginnings, of promises kept and promises yet to be made, of two lonely souls who had finally found their home in each other. When they finally returned to the ballroom, hand in hand, Madeleine caught sight of her reflection in one of the tall mirrors lining the walls. The woman staring back at her was radiant, flushed with happiness, eyes bright with love, smiling with a joy that transformed her completely. She was no longer the invisible spinster, the family disappointment, the woman society had dismissed. She was the future Duchess of Stormholt, and more importantly, she was beloved. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear over Winterbourne Manor. Madeleine woke in her own bed for perhaps the last time as an unmarried woman, the sapphire engagement ring catching the winter sunlight streaming through her window. It had not been a dream. She pressed her hand to her heart, feeling it race with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. In the space of 2 weeks, her entire life had transformed. She was engaged to a duke. She was loved. She was finally, gloriously happy. A soft knock at her door was followed by Charlotte entering with a breakfast tray. "I thought you might wish to take your morning meal in private," her sister said with a knowing smile. "After last night's excitement, I imagine you need some peace." "You are an angel," Madeleine said gratefully, sitting up against her pillows. "Last night was extraordinary," Charlotte supplied, setting the tray across Madeleine's lap. Miraculous. The most romantic thing anyone has ever witnessed. She sat on the edge of the bed, her expression turning serious. Madeleine, I have never seen you so happy. The Duke truly loves you. He does, Madeleine confirmed, still marveling at the truth of it. Charlotte, I keep waiting to wake up and discover this was all an elaborate dream. It is not a dream, her sister assured her, though I confess it does have the quality of a fairy tale. The dismissed spinster captures the heart of the most eligible duke in England. It is the stuff of romantic novels. Madeleine laughed. You know how much I love those novels. Perhaps I have finally received my own happy ending. Oh, this is not an ending, Charlotte said with a mischievous glint in her eyes. This is only the beginning. Now you must plan a wedding, manage a ducal household, navigate society as a duchess, and presumably produce an heir or two. Your adventure is just starting. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying, but as Madeleine looked at the ring on her finger, she felt a surge of confidence. With Adrian beside her, she could face anything. Adrian arrived at Winterbourne Manor's breakfast room, looking slightly worse for wear. Evidence that the gentleman had celebrated well into the early morning hours after the ladies retired. But his eyes lit up the moment he saw Madeleine, and he crossed the room to press a kiss to her hand, with such tender devotion that several family members sighed audibly. "Good morning, my darling," he murmured. "I trust you slept well?" "I did. Once I finally convinced myself last night was not a fever dream," Madeleine replied. "And you? You look as though you did not sleep at all. Your father insisted on breaking out his finest brandy to celebrate our engagement," Adrian admitted, claiming the seat beside her. "I believe I consumed more spirits last night than I have in the past year combined. But it was worth it to see his joy. He is very proud of you, Madeleine." Earl Joseph, seated at the head of the table, raised his coffee cup in salute. "Indeed I am. Though I confess, Your Grace, you gave us all quite the surprise last night. I had suspected some understanding between you, but I did not anticipate such a public declaration." "I am not a man who does things by half measures," Adrian said with a slight smile. "When I commit to something, or someone, I do so completely." "That much is abundantly clear," Lady Amelia interjected warmly. "Now we must discuss wedding plans. The season begins in April. Would you prefer a London ceremony, or something here at Winterbourne?" Adrian glanced at Madeleine. "That is entirely for my bride to decide, though I confess I am not inclined toward a long engagement. I have waited 32 years to find the right woman. Now that I have, I see no reason to delay." Madeleine felt heat rise to her cheeks. "How soon are you suggesting? Would February be too precipitous?" Adrian's dark eyes held a challenge and a plea in equal measure. "I realize it is unconventionally quick, but I find I am quite done with convention where you are concerned." "February," Madeleine repeated, her heart racing. That was barely 6 weeks away, but when she thought about waiting months to truly begin their life together, the idea seemed unbearable. "I think February would be perfect." Lady Amelia looked momentarily flustered. "But that allows so little time for preparations. The dress, the flowers, the guest list. Then we shall keep it intimate," Adrian suggested. "Family and close friends only. I have no desire for a grand spectacle. I simply want to marry Madeleine as soon as propriety allows." The Earl chuckled. "I can hardly object to a man so eager to wed my daughter. Very well. A February wedding it shall be." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Madeleine found herself swept up in preparations that felt surreal in their joy. Where once she had been ignored and dismissed, now she was the center of attention, but for all the right reasons. Adrian's mother, the Dowager Duchess of Stormholt, arrived at Winterbourne 3 days after Christmas. Madeleine had been terrified to meet her, certain that Adrian's aristocratic mother would object to his choice of bride. But the Dowager surprised her. "Finally," the elegant older woman said, embracing Madeleine warmly. "Finally, my stubborn son has found someone worthy of him. Lady Madeleine, you must call me Catherine. We are to be family after all." "You do not object to the match?" Madeleine asked hesitantly. Catherine laughed, a sound remarkably similar to Adrian's rare laughter. "Object? My dear girl, I am overjoyed. For years I have watched Adrian wall himself off from any possibility of love or connection. I had nearly given up hope that he would allow himself happiness. Then he wrote to me about you, and for the first time in decades, his letters contained genuine emotion. She took Madeline's hands in hers. You have given my son back to me. How could I possibly object? Over the following days, Madeleine came to adore Catherine. The Dowager Duchess was sharp-witted, kind-hearted, and possessed a refreshing disregard for pointless social conventions. She helped Madeleine navigate the complexities of becoming a duchess, sharing stories of her own experiences, and offering advice that was both practical and encouraging. The ton will be scandalized at first, Catherine said one afternoon as they reviewed guest lists. A duke marrying a woman who had been deemed unmarriageable? They will gossip and speculate and invent all manner of dramatic explanations. That troubles me, Madeleine admitted. Do not let it. Catherine's expression was fierce. Let them gossip. Within a year, they will have moved on to some other scandal. But you and Adrian will still be happy, still be in love, and still be building a life together. That is all that truly matters. Adrian had returned to his estate, Stormholt Castle, to attend to business matters, but he wrote to Madeleine daily. His letters were treasures that she read and reread until she had them memorized. My darling Madeleine, I have been away from you for 3 days, and already I feel the absence like a physical ache. How did I survive 32 years without knowing you? How did I tolerate the emptiness of my life before you illuminated it? Stormholt Castle awaits its new mistress with anticipation equal to my own. I have instructed the staff to prepare the Duchess's chambers according to your preferences. My mother assures me you favor blue, so I have had the rooms redecorated in shades of sapphire and silver. I hope this pleases you. I count the days until we are wed. Until then, know that you occupy my every thought and have completely captured my heart. Yours eternally. Adrian. Madeleine pressed the letter to her chest, smiling foolishly. She wrote back immediately, filling pages with her own declarations of love and descriptions of the wedding preparations. It felt extraordinary to have someone who wanted to know every detail of her day, who cared about her thoughts and feelings, who loved her exactly as she was. The wedding took place on a crisp February morning at the chapel on the Winterbourne estate. Despite their intentions to keep the ceremony small, over 100 guests attended, family, friends, and members of society who were desperate to witness the unlikely union of the Duke of Stormholt and Lady Madeleine Winterbourne. Madeleine's wedding gown was a confection of ivory silk and Bruges lace, with a train that required 2 attendants to manage. Charlotte and several cousins served as her bridesmaids, all of them dabbing at their eyes as they helped her prepare. You look like a princess, Charlotte whispered, as she adjusted Madeleine's veil. A radiant, beautiful princess who is about to marry her prince. Technically, I'm about to marry a duke, Madeleine corrected with a nervous laugh. Which is rather better than a prince, if you ask me. Her father arrived to escort her to the chapel, and she saw tears in his eyes as he looked at her. My darling girl, he said hoarsely, I am so very proud of you, and so very sorry for all the years I allowed you to believe you were anything less than extraordinary. Papa, no, let me say this. He took her hands carefully, mindful of her gloves. I failed you, Madeleine. I allowed society's cruel judgments to influence how I saw you, how I treated you. But watching you with the Duke, seeing the woman you have become despite all obstacles, I realize that you are the strongest, bravest person I know. Adrian is a fortunate man. I am equally fortunate, Madeleine said, squeezing his hands. He sees me, Papa. Truly sees me. I did not realize how much I needed that until I had it. Then let us not keep him waiting any longer, her father said, offering his arm. Your Duke is probably pacing a hole in the chapel floor. He was not wrong. When Madeleine entered the chapel on her father's arm, she could see Adrian at the altar, his hands clasped behind his back in what she recognized as a gesture of barely contained emotion. But when he caught sight of her, his entire face transformed with such joy and love that Madeleine felt tears prick her eyes. The ceremony itself was a blur of traditional vows and prayers. Madeleine was aware of the guests watching, of her mother weeping openly, of Charlotte beaming with happiness. But mostly she was aware of Adrian, his strong hands holding hers, his dark eyes never leaving her face, his voice steady and sure as he promised to love and cherish her for the rest of their lives. I do, she whispered, when asked if she took this man as her husband. I do, Adrian replied when asked the same question. and the words held such conviction that several guests sighed audibly. When the vicar finally pronounced them man and wife, Adrian did not wait for permission to kiss his bride. He pulled Madeleine into his arms and kissed her with a thoroughness that bordered on scandalous, earning applause and a few shocked gasps from the assembled guests. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "My wife, my Duchess, my Madeleine." "And I love you," she replied. "My husband, my Adrian, my everything." The wedding breakfast was a joyous affair held in Winterbourne Manor's grand ballroom, the same ballroom where, just 6 weeks earlier, Adrian had publicly declared his love. Now it was filled with guests celebrating their union, toasting their happiness, and marveling at the unlikely romance that had captured everyone's imagination. Lavinia approached Madeleine during the reception, her expression tentative. "Your Grace," she said formally, "I hope I might have a word." "Of course," Madeleine replied, noting that her cousin looked genuinely nervous. "And please, we are family. You may still call me Madeleine." Thank you." Lavinia twisted her hands together. "I wanted to say again how sorry I am for my past behavior. Watching you today, seeing how the Duke loves you, realizing the happiness you have found, it has made me examine my own conduct with shame. Lavinia, please, let me finish." Her cousin took a deep breath. "I was cruel because I was frightened of becoming what you were, unwed, dismissed, forgotten. I thought that by mocking you, I could distance myself from that fate. But I see now that I was wrong. You were never pitiable. You were patient, waiting for the right person to see your worth. I only hope I can learn from your example." Madeleine felt her heart soften completely. "We all make mistakes, Lavinia. What matters is that we learn from them and do better. I hope we can build a genuine friendship now without cruelty or competition." Lavinia's eyes filled with tears. "I would like that very much. Thank you for your kindness, Your Grace. You are a far better person than I deserve." As her cousin walked away, Adrian appeared at Madeleine's side, offering her a glass of champagne. "You handled that with remarkable grace," he observed. "Most women would have been less forgiving." "I am too happy to hold grudges," Madeleine admitted. "Besides, I understand what drove her behavior. Fear makes us do terrible things sometimes. I'm just grateful I no longer have to live in fear." "You will never have to fear again," Adrian promised, slipping his arm around her waist in a possessive gesture that sent pleasant shivers down her spine. "I will spend the rest of my life ensuring your happiness and security." "Such a heavy burden," Madeleine teased. "However will you manage? I suspect it will be the easiest task I have ever undertaken." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Now, how much longer must we remain at this reception before we can escape to begin our wedding journey?" "Eager to leave already, Your Grace." "Desperately." His dark eyes held unmistakable heat. "I have been patient and proper for weeks now. I find my restraint is quite exhausted." Madeleine felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she smiled. "I believe we must stay at least another hour. But after that, you are mine," Adrian finished. "Completely and irrevocably mine." They departed for Stormholt Castle as the winter sun was setting, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. The journey would take 3 hours by carriage, and Adrian had arranged for them to travel in comfort with heated bricks, warm blankets, and a basket of refreshments. But Madeleine had no interest in food or scenery. She was too busy studying her husband, still marveling at that word, in the close confines of the carriage. "You are staring," Adrian observed with amusement. "I am admiring," Madeleine corrected. "There is a difference." "Admiring what, precisely?" "The fact that you are real, that this is real, that I am actually married to the Duke of Stormholt and on my way to my new home." Adrian pulled her close, arranging them so that she was tucked against his side with his arm around her shoulders. "Your new home," he repeated. "Your castle, your duchy. Everything I have is now yours, Madeleine." "I do not need castles or titles," she said softly. "I only need you." "You have me," Adrian promised. "For today and for all our tomorrows, I am yours in every way that matters." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, watching the winter landscape pass beyond the windows. Then Adrian spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "Do you remember our first conversation, when you said survival was all you could hope for?" "I remember." "You will never merely survive again," he said fiercely. "From this day forward you will flourish. You will be loved, cherished, respected. You will have everything you were denied for so long. I swear this to you." Madeleine turned in his arms to face him fully. "Adrian, you have already given me everything. You saw me when I was invisible. You valued me when others dismissed me. You loved me when I had given up hope of being loved. Everything else is simply wonderful addition." "I intend to spend our entire marriage adding wonderful things to your life," Adrian replied, starting immediately. He kissed her then, deep and passionate, a claiming kiss that left no doubt about his intentions for their wedding night. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Madeleine rested her forehead against his. "2 more hours until we reach Stormholt," she whispered. "2 hours too long," Adrian replied. But they passed the time in pleasant conversation, discussing their plans for the future. Adrian wanted to show her every corner of his estate, introduce her to his tenants, teach her about the management of his properties. Madeleine wanted to establish charitable works in the surrounding villages, create a proper library at Stormholt, and perhaps, eventually, fill the castle's nursery with children. "How many children do you envision?" Adrian asked with interest. "I have not given it extensive thought," Madeleine admitted, "but I think perhaps 3 or 4. Enough that they will not be lonely, but not so many that we cannot give each one proper attention and love." 3 or 4 sounds perfect, Adrian agreed, though I confess I am more interested in the process of creating those children than the actual number we settle upon. "Adrian," Madeleine swatted his arm, laughing, "that is hardly proper conversation. I am conversing with my wife in the privacy of our carriage," he pointed out. "I believe I am allowed some impropriety." When they finally arrived at Stormholt Castle, Madeleine was struck by its imposing beauty. The castle was centuries old, all grey stone and soaring towers, with lights glowing warmly in the windows. The staff had assembled to greet their new Duchess, and Adrian led her through formal introductions with patient courtesy. Mrs. Hensworth, the housekeeper, was a formidable woman in her 60s who nevertheless smiled warmly at Madeleine. "Your Grace, we are delighted to welcome you to Stormholt. His Grace has spoken of little else but your arrival these past weeks." "Thank you, Mrs. Hensworth," Madeleine replied. "I am eager to learn about the household and make myself useful." "Useful?" Adrian interjected. "Darling, you are the Duchess. You need not make yourself useful. You need only make yourself happy." "I shall be happy making myself useful," Madeleine said firmly. "I am not accustomed to idleness, Adrian. I will need occupation beyond simply existing as your Duchess." Pride shone in Adrian's eyes. "Then we shall find you all the occupation you desire. But first," he turned to the assembled staff, "that will be all for this evening. The Duchess and I wish to be alone." If the staff found this unusual, they gave no sign. They simply bowed and curtsied before dispersing to their quarters, leaving Adrian and Madeleine standing alone in the grand entrance hall. "Alone at last," Adrian murmured, pulling Madeleine into his arms. "Do you know how long I have been waiting for this moment?" "As long as I have, I imagine," Madeleine replied, her heart racing as he began trailing kisses down her neck. "Let me show you our chambers," he suggested, his voice rough with desire. "I believe you will find them quite comfortable." He swept her up into his arms, making her gasp and laugh. "Adrian, you do not need to carry me." "Oh, but I do," he insisted, already carrying her toward the grand staircase. "It is tradition for a groom to carry his bride over the threshold, and I find I am quite devoted to tradition, when it suits me." The Duchess's chambers were magnificent, all done in the shades of blue and silver Adrian had mentioned in his letter, with a massive 4-poster bed draped in silk. But Madeleine had eyes only for her husband as he set her gently on her feet. "I love you," she said simply, "more than I have words to express." "Then perhaps words are unnecessary," Adrian replied, beginning to remove the pins from her hair. "Let me show you instead how much I love you, how much I have been longing for this moment, how completely you own my heart." And as the fire crackled in the hearth and the winter wind howled outside, Adrian kept his promise. He showed Madeleine with tender touches and passionate kisses exactly how precious she was to him. He worshipped her with his hands and his mouth and his body, demonstrating with every caress that she was cherished beyond measure. Later, as they lay tangled together in the silk sheets, Madeleine traced idle patterns on Adrian's chest. "I have something to confess," she said softly. "Oh?" Have you been harboring secrets from your husband already? Adrian's tone was teasing. Do you remember our rule? The one we established when this all began? No real feelings, only pretense. I remember. I broke that rule the very first day, Madeline admitted. When you defended me at dinner, when you invited me to ride with you, I was already halfway in love with you before we even made our agreement. I just did not want to admit it to myself. Adrian turned to face her fully, his expression tender. Then we are equally guilty, my darling, because I broke that rule before I even proposed it. I was falling in love with you while I was still trying to convince myself this was merely a practical arrangement. We are both terrible liars, it seems. The worst, Adrian agreed. Thank heavens for that. They fell asleep in each other's arms, two souls who had found their perfect match against all odds and expectations. A few years later, the gardens at Stormholt Castle were in full bloom, roses and honeysuckle perfuming the warm June air. Madeline sat on a blanket spread beneath an ancient oak tree, watching her husband chase their 2-year-old son, Thomas, across the grass. I am going to catch you, Adrian declared in exaggerated menace. The Duke of Stormholt always catches his prey. Thomas shrieked with laughter, his dark curls bouncing as he ran on chubby toddler legs. He looked remarkably like his father, the same dark eyes, the same aristocratic features, though his temperament was decidedly more sunny. Mama! Thomas cried, throwing himself into Madeline's arms. Save me. I shall protect you from your fierce papa, Madeline promised, holding her giggling son close, though I fear he is quite determined. Adrian collapsed onto the blanket beside them, pulling both Madeline and Thomas into his embrace. Defeated by a woman and a small child, my reputation is quite ruined. Your reputation as a devoted husband and father is quite secure, Madeline corrected, pressing a kiss to his cheek, which is far more important. Life at Stormholt had exceeded even Madeline's most optimistic dreams. She had established 3 schools for the children of Adrian's tenants, organized charitable works throughout the duchy, and created one of the finest libraries in all of England. She and Adrian had traveled to Italy and France, had hosted house parties and intimate gatherings, had built a life filled with love and laughter and purpose. And through it all, Adrian had been her constant companion, her greatest supporter, her truest friend. He loved her with an intensity that never dimmed, cherished her with a devotion that never wavered, and reminded her daily that she was precious beyond measure. What are you thinking about? Adrian asked, studying her face. About how far I have come, Madeline replied. 3 years ago, I was invisible, dismissed, certain I would spend my life alone and unloved. And now, she gestured at the scene around them, at their beautiful home, their perfect son, the life they had built together. Now I have everything I never dared to dream of. We have everything, Adrian corrected, because this life would be meaningless without you in it. He kissed her softly, then grinned. Though I confess I am eager to expand our family. Thomas needs a sibling. Does he? Madeline asked with a secret smile. Something in her tone made Adrian's eyes sharpen. Madeline, I was planning to tell you this evening, but I suppose now is as good a time as any. She took his hand and placed it gently on her still flat stomach. Thomas will have a sibling by Christmas. For a moment, Adrian simply stared at her. Then he let out a whoop of joy that startled the birds from the trees and made Thomas clap his hands with delight. He kissed Madeline thoroughly, then her stomach, then her lips again. Another child, he breathed. Madeline, you are extraordinary. You give me everything. We give each other everything, she corrected. That is the nature of true partnership. As the afternoon sun warmed the gardens and Thomas played contentedly with his wooden toys, Madeline reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. She had started as an unwanted guest at her own family's gatherings, invisible and dismissed. She had agreed to a false engagement as a desperate attempt to matter, just once, to someone. But that false engagement had transformed into the truest love she could have imagined, and the Duke who had asked her to pretend to be his fiancé at a Christmas ball had become her husband, her partner, the father of her children, and the keeper of her heart. Sometimes, Madeline thought, the best things in life come from taking chances, from being brave enough to reach for what seems impossible, from believing that you deserve love, even when the world tells you otherwise. And sometimes the greatest love stories begin with a simple question and one impossible rule. Pretend to be my fiancé, but do not fall in love. Some rules Madeleine had learned were made to be broken, and she had never been more grateful for her own rebellious heart. The end. Dear listener, tonight I want to tell you something nobody else will say. The world has taught you to apologize for taking up space, to shrink yourself, to believe that if love hasn't found you yet, or if dreams haven't materialized on society's timeline, then somehow the fault lies with you. You've learned to scan rooms looking for proof of your inadequacy, measuring yourself against impossible standards, keeping score of everything you lack. But here's what Madeleine discovered, and what I hope settles into your bones tonight like warm honey. The people who dismissed you were never your mirror. They were simply showing you their own limitations. Think about that. Every person who looked past you, who underestimated you, who failed to see your magic, they weren't revealing a truth about you. They were revealing the boundaries of their own vision. Some people can only see what glitters on the surface. They miss the diamond because they're hypnotized by rhinestones. You have been auditioning for the wrong audience your entire life. And the exhaustion you feel, that bone-deep weariness, it comes from performing in a theater where the seats were always empty. You've been trying to prove yourself to people who were never capable of understanding you in the first place. That's not failure. That's freedom waiting to be claimed. Adrien didn't rescue Madeleine. Let's be clear about that. He simply had the good sense to recognize what was already there, a woman of substance who had been standing in plain sight all along. She didn't become worthy when he noticed her. She had always been worthy. He just had better eyes than the others. Here's the truth they don't tell you in fairy tales. Sometimes the most radical act of courage isn't slaying dragons or climbing towers. It's sitting quietly with yourself and saying, I see you, I value you, and I'm not abandoning you anymore. It's learning to be the Adrien to your own Madeleine, the one who finally looks at you with clear eyes and says, how did everyone else miss this? Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, I want you to imagine something. Imagine all the judgments, all the rejections, all the cruel words and dismissive glances. Imagine them as stones you've been carrying in a heavy sack on your back. One by one, you're setting them down, not because you've earned the right to release them, but because they were never yours to carry in the first place. Sleep now with the fierce certainty that you matter, not because of what you might become, but because of what you already are. Rest in the knowledge that your story is far stranger and more beautiful than anything you could have planned. Trust that the universe has better timing than you do, and a much more interesting plot in mind. Tomorrow will come with its own small mercies. For now, let yourself be held by the darkness, protected by the night, cradled by the simple truth that you are here. You survived, and that alone makes you extraordinary. May peace find you in the quiet hours. May rest restore what the world has depleted. May you wake knowing what Madeleine learned. The right eyes will always find you, and until they do, your own eyes are enough. With profound gratitude for your presence in this world, and for listening to this story that we hope reminded you of your own strength. The Legends of the Fall Team. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this unforgettable love story. If this story touched your heart, we warmly invite you to subscribe, like, comment, and share. Your support truly helps us keep telling stories full of love, redemption, and beautiful twists of fate. We create each story with care, hoping it brings warmth to your day and comfort to your heart. Your presence here means more than words can say. And don't forget, at the end of this video, you'll see another story from our channel. Click it and let yourself be surprised by another emotional journey. Thank you for being here. The Legends of the Fall Team.